Admiral Richard E. Byrd was one of the most decorated officers in U.S. Navy history. He's the only person ever to receive 3 ticker tape parades in New York City. One in 1926, another in 1927, and a third in 1930, all in his honor. He was also one of just 4 American military officers allowed to wear a medal with his own image on it. When it comes to accomplishments, authenticity, and recognition, there was no one quite like Richard E. Byrd. But what he was best known for were his expeditions. He explored places no one else dared to go. You see, Byrd had a drive to be first in everything. It was almost like an obsession. That's probably why he racked up so many firsts, including becoming the youngest admiral in history at just 41 years old. His desire to be first is also why he had no hesitation leading expeditions to Antarctica from the early 1900s all the way into the early 2000s. He led 5 separate expeditions to Antarctica. The last 3 were funded by the U.S. government, while the first 2 came out of his own pocket and the support of a few believers. Byrd's first expedition took place in 1928, using 2 ships and 3 airplanes. That summer, his team took photographs, studied rock formations, and stayed in radio contact with the outside world at all times. Then in the summer of 1933 and 1934, Byrd went on his second expedition. This time, he spent 5 months alone at an advanced base, a remote meteorological station. It was during this mission that he almost died from carbon monoxide poisoning caused by a poorly ventilated stove. While these early expeditions were important and groundbreaking, they weren't the ones that stirred controversy. In fact, the first 2 were drama-free. But the third expedition was different, and that's when the government started getting heavily involved. Between 1946 and 1947, Byrd led an operation known as Operation Highjump. The mission was to establish a research base on the Ross Ice Shelf called Little America 4. World War II had revealed that U.S. ships and aircraft weren't built for freezing conditions. Ships operating in Arctic waters literally froze, and planes flying from Greenland and Iceland often crashed due to the weather. To address this, the U.S. developed new protocols for testing cold weather performance in both ships and aircraft. At the same time, the military wanted to see if a long-distance mission could even be sustained in such harsh environments. Operation Highjump was created to test this, sending a full naval task force to Antarctica to see how equipment would hold up. They also aimed to map a large portion of the continent, possibly to stake territorial claims or simply to satisfy Pentagon curiosity. And of course, the perfect man to lead such a bold mission was the fearless and highly experienced Admiral Byrd. The operation was considered such a success that it was actually cut short early. Because of what they learned, U.S. ships and planes were soon winterized, ready for cold weather warfare, especially in case a new conflict broke out with the Soviets. One of the most notable examples of what came from Operation Highjump was how nuclear-capable B-29 bombers were adapted for winter conditions, so they could fly missions from places like Alaska if needed. Now, everything I've told you so far has been the official government version of the story. But here's where people started asking questions. If this was really just a drill, then why did they bring 14 ships, 33 aircraft, and around 4,700 fully armed personnel? There were 2 destroyer tankers, 2 heavily armed seaplanes, and even an attack submarine, each fully equipped with some of the best weapons in the entire Navy. That's an enormous show of force for what was supposed to be a simple training exercise. Apparently, they needed that kind of power to confront something much bigger. Some say it was the Nazis in Antarctica. Back in December 1938, Hitler already knew war was coming, so he began setting things in motion, looking for any kind of edge, even in the most unconventional places. It might sound insane, but Hitler authorized expeditions to search for ancient, mysterious artifacts that could give him an advantage. One such expedition launched on December 17, 1938, when the SS Schwabenland set off on a secret mission to Antarctica. On board were scientists, engineers, and members of the Thule Society, a German occultist group. The Thule Society held many disturbing beliefs, especially rooted in racism, targeting anyone who wasn't like them, particularly the Jewish people. But they also believed in the existence of an ancient, advanced race of human-like beings called the Aryans, who supposedly lived deep inside the Earth. They believed the entrance to the Aryan's world was at the South Pole. So, the secret mission given to the SS Schwabenland was to locate a spot for an underground base and to make contact with these inner-Earth beings. If they succeeded, the goal was to negotiate access to their technology and use it to gain the upper hand in the coming war. A month later, the ship reached the Antarctic coast. Over the next several weeks, they mapped hundreds of thousands of square miles of the continent. Roughly 150 miles inland, aerial reconnaissance discovered what they called an Arctic oasis, a 300 square mile zone free of ice, with warm water and actual plant life. This shouldn't have been possible, but it was explained by the presence of geothermal vents beneath the area, which kept it relatively warm. This made it the perfect location for a secret base, especially for the Nazis. That's where they allegedly established the infamous underground facility known as Base 211. Over the course of World War II, Base 211 reportedly grew into a massive complex, about the size of a small city. Naturally, the American government became concerned with what the Nazis were doing in Antarctica. You know that old saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. That's exactly what the US was trying to do with Operation Highjump. Operation Highjump was originally planned to last 6 to 8 months. But as I mentioned earlier, it was suddenly cut short after just 40 days. The team was pulled out, and the entire operation was shut down almost immediately. The Navy claimed it was due to worsening weather and an early winter. But here's the thing. February is the height of summer in Antarctica. Their explanation didn't match the reality. Something else was going on. Remember that they went there in the first place to test their stuff against the cold. If what they said was true, shouldn't the weather be perfect for their test? This was when the conspiracy theories started coming out. Did something happen in Antarctica that made the massive Navy group return to the United States? Probably to reassess and regroup? And what were they regrouping for? For a long time, nobody knew, but all that changed when a diary was found. On one of his routine flights, Admiral Byrd was flying over the South Pole while speaking with the American public over live radio, being relayed by the Navy to listeners. This was like watching your favorite influencer talk or share their experiences. However, during the broadcast, Byrd was cut off from his radio monologue for nearly 3 hours. No one could hear him, not even the Navy. This was a problem. No one knew where Byrd was or could communicate with him. It was after Byrd released his diary that we were able to see what happened in those 3 missing hours. We were crossing over the small mountain range and still proceeding northward as best as can be ascertained. Beyond the mountain range is what appears to be a valley with a small river or stream running through the center portion. There should be no green valley below. Something is definitely wrong and abnormal here. We should be over ice and snow. To the port side are great forests growing on the mountain slopes. Our navigation instruments are still spinning. The gyroscope is oscillating back and forth. Byrd had stumbled on a place he couldn't explain. Antarctica is one of the coldest places on Earth. Warmth and green, fleshy plantations shouldn't exist. To make it even more confusing, Byrd talks about not seeing the sun anymore, which was worrying for him because he was having problems with his navigation system, so he had to resort to using the sun for directions. And now he can't find the sun. The light here seems different. I cannot see the sun anymore. We make another left turn, and we spot what seems to be a large animal of some kind below us. It appears to be an elephant. No. It looks more like a mammoth. This is incredible. Yet there it is. Decrease altitude to 1,000 feet and take binoculars to better examine the animal. It is confirmed. It is definitely a mammoth-like animal. Report this to base camp. He tried to radio in, but the radio was not working. And that's when he saw it. Ahead, we spot what seems to be a city. This is impossible. The aircraft seems light and oddly buoyant. The controls refuse to respond. My God. Off our port and starboard wings are a strange type of aircraft. They are closing rapidly alongside. They are disc-shaped and have a radiant quality to them. They are close enough now to see the markings on them. It is a type of swastika. This is fantastic. Now, even I don't know what we saw. Was it an alien? Was it an ancient civilization? Was it actually the Aryans the Germans were looking for? What was it? Byrd's radio finally started to work, and a voice came through, speaking English with a Nordic or Germanic accent. The voice told Byrd that they would help him land and that he shouldn't worry, that he was in good hands. This was during World War II, so hearing anyone talk with a German accent about trusting them was like trusting the devil for a blessing. But Byrd couldn't do anything or run away. The engines on his plane stopped working and were under some strange control. It was driving itself and even landed safely all by itself. Several men are approaching on foot toward our aircraft. They are tall, with blonde hair. In the distance is a large, shimmering city, pulsating with rainbow hues of color. I do not know what is going to happen now, but I see no signs of weapons on those approaching. I now hear a voice ordering me by name to open the cargo door. I comply and log. Byrd was taken from the aircraft and boarded onto a small, platform-like conveyance with no wheels, which carried him into the city. Byrd was in awe of what he saw, a city made of crystal materials that made it very beautiful. He was then taken into a large building. It was there that he met the one known as the Master. I see a man with delicate features and with the etching of years upon his face. He is seated at a long table. He motions for me to sit down in one of the chairs. After I am seated, he places his fingertips together and smiles. He speaks softly again and conveys the following. We have let you enter here because you are of noble character and well known on the surface world. Admiral. Surface world, I gasp under my breath. Yes, the Master replies with a smile. You are in the domain of the Ariani, the inner world of the Earth. Byrd was shocked. If what the Master had just said was true, that meant everything we've ever known about our universe, and Earth was wrong. Let me take a moment to explain why this is mind-blowing. There is a theory known as the Hollow Earth theory. Some people strongly believe that there was, and likely still is, an opening to the center of the Earth. In the 1690s, English astronomer Edmund Halley told the Royal Society of London that he believed the Earth was made up of stacked spherical shells that spun in different directions around a central core. Halley thought that the space between the shells could have conditions that supported life. In the 1810s, American officer John Clevy's Sims added to Halley's idea by saying those spheres could be reached through holes at both the North and South Poles. Some believers claim this inner Earth is home to aliens, Vikings, ancient civilizations, and even Nazis trying to escape the Allies. Others even claim that Adam and Eve from the Bible were banished from the inside of the Earth to the outside, and that the lost tribes of Israel migrated from the outside to the inside. Of course, you don't hear about any of this because it has been debunked by numerous governments. But if what Byrd said and stumbled upon is true, then that means we've all lived a lie. The Master told Byrd that he meant him no harm, but wanted to speak with him because Byrd was a respected figure, and his voice carried weight in the surface world, which was true. The Master then explained the reason they intercepted Byrd's plane. It was to deliver a message to the surface world about the state of the world above. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, had deeply concerned them. The world had never seen anything like that before. It was so alarming that they risked exposing themselves by sending their flying ships to investigate what had happened. Surprisingly, this matches many eyewitness accounts of UFOs seen during that time. And oddly enough, these UFOs are mostly seen around nuclear plants, facilities that could be used for nuclear warfare. In many of these cases, the plants later reported that something had mysteriously shut down or was sabotaged, like in the case of the Solway First Spaceman. It's strange to say, but maybe it's not a coincidence that we haven't had a World War III. Not that I'm hoping for one. I love peace. But considering how much humanity leans toward division over unity, it's strange. So maybe, just maybe, we owe these people our lives. The Master keeps talking about how they have to intervene because mankind has learned to tamper with certain powers. Our emissaries have already delivered messages to the powers of your world, and yet they do not heed. Your race has now reached the point of no return, for there are those among you who would destroy your very world rather than relinquish their power as they know it. The dark ages that will come now for your race will cover the earth like a pall, but I believe that some of your race will live through the storm. Beyond that, I cannot say. We see at a great distance a new world stirring from the ruins of your race, seeking its lost and legendary treasures. And they will be here, my son, safe in our keeping. When that time arrives, we shall come forward again to help revive your culture and your race. Perhaps by then, you will have learned the futility of war and its strife. And after that time, certain parts of your culture and science will be returned for your race to begin anew. You, my son, are to return to the surface world with this message. After Byrd was given the full message, he was escorted out of the room and soon arrived back at their aircraft. They were then escorted out of the Crystal City. As soon as they left the city, a radio message came through. "We are leaving you now, Admiral. Your controls are free. Auf Wiedersehen." And that was it. Byrd was confused about what had just happened. Finally, his radio was working again, and the Navy was able to reach him. On March 11th, 1947, after the expedition was cut short, Byrd attended a staff meeting at the Pentagon, where he was debriefed. He told everyone present what he saw and the message he had received. After this debriefing, Admiral Byrd was detained for several hours, 6 hours and 39 minutes to be exact. He was intensely interviewed by top security officials and a medical team. He was placed under strict control and ordered to remain silent about everything he saw or heard at the Crystal City. He was reminded that, after all, he was a military man and must obey orders. Their plan worked. Byrd hardly gave any interviews after Operation Highjump. He was always careful about what he said, but Byrd writing it all down in his diary, and that diary being released after his death, was him having the last laugh. When Byrd left the expedition and returned to Chile, because that was where the Navy first retreated to before heading back home, he was interviewed by a Chilean journalist. In that interview, he talked about how the U.S. would face an enemy capable of flying from pole to pole. It sounded strange, and people wondered what he meant. But after his diary was released to the public, people couldn't help but wonder if he had been referring to the civilization he met at the South Pole. It didn't help matters that the Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, committed suicide, according to official reports. Forrestal allegedly jumped out of the window of a psychiatric ward in Maryland. That was shortly after Operation Highjump. Before his death, Forrestal was known to advocate that aliens existed, and he wanted to inform the U.S. public. Instead, he was labeled as insane, admitted to a mental hospital, and later, allegedly jumped to his death. The one man who knew something about Operation Highjump and was going to talk about it was now dead. Case closed. As usual, there are critics who make solid points about people making up stories. And when Byrd mentioned in an interview that the U.S. might be attacked from pole to pole, people thought he was talking about aliens. But really, he was likely referring to the Germans potentially launching attacks from the South Pole to the North Pole. Nothing extraterrestrial about it. The truth is, journalists know how to take something basic and spin it into something spectacular. It helps sell more papers. But the biggest criticism of all, the diary itself, it may have never existed. That's right. According to some sources, Byrd never actually wrote it. The whole thing could have been made up, just like how his claim of being the first to reach the North Pole was later debunked. He held that title for years, even after death, until someone finally questioned it and proved it wasn't true. Still, something keeps nagging at me. How is it that almost every country in the world, countries that argue and go to war over the smallest things, have somehow managed to agree on one thing? Antarctica? They've all come together peacefully under the Antarctic Treaty signed in the 1960s. It outlines strict rules for the continent. Most people don't know this, but you can't just go to Antarctica. Unless you're a scientist with special clearance, or somehow get approved access, it's pretty much off limits. Sure, there are a few luxury cruises, but those are carefully controlled, often linked to people with intelligence or government ties. So whatever they show you is carefully curated, sanitized, and yet, the treaty works. Almost too well. We're told it's to protect the environment and preserve resources. And maybe that's true, but it's strange that, in a world filled with conflict, this is the one thing everyone respects. And let's not forget, over the past few decades, there have been multiple eyewitness reports of strange flying objects, UFOs, rising from the waters near Antarctica. Even if Byrd's diary was fake, it still makes you think. One fact remains. He went missing for 3 hours during that flight. No one could reach him. No radio contact. Nothing. So where was he? And how did he manage to stay in the air for so long without refueling? Then there's the suspicious death of the Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, and later, Byrd's own son. That alone makes what should have been a closed case feel very much open. Byrd's son was found dead in an abandoned warehouse in Baltimore, just days before the alleged diary was made public. The cause of death? Malnutrition and dehydration. Now think about that. How does the son of a wealthy, prominent family from Massachusetts end up dying like that? If all of this is just coincidence, that's a lot of coincidence. Too much if you ask me.